Watch to the end of this video to learn how to use Bova two-way humidity control products to get the most out of your guitars, cannabis, and even cigars. Then, head to bovadainc.com and use code OKPodcast at checkout to save 10% on your next purchase of Bova products. Hi, I'm your host, Sean Perrin, and you are listening to OK Podcast, the Radiohead podcast. And today I am so happy to have a very special guest, Dallon, who is of the band I Don't Know How But They Found Me, and also formerly of Panic at the Disco. He's a fantastic musician, probably the biggest guest we've ever had on this show, and I really just want to say welcome to the podcast, Dallon.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm always happy to have any opportunity to talk about music and bands that I love.
Absolutely. Well, I got a lot of great questions coming in here from listeners and some of your fans for sure. Seems like there's a bit of crossover between Radiohead fans and your fans, so that is always good.
I hope so. Who doesn't want that? That's
exactly
fantastic.
Right.
Yeah.
So I wanted to start off, this is a Radiohead podcast, but I want to start off talking a bit about your new music and kind of your process a bit, and we'll dive into some Radiohead stuff as it comes up, I suppose. But first of all, you've got a new album that is coming out pretty soon. I've been really fortunate to have a listen to that, which I felt super lucky about. So that was awesome. I love it.
Well, thank you. That's very nice of you to say. It's been a long time waiting for it to come out. There's a lot of stuff in between its inception and its release that sort of put it on delay, but it's finally rolling out bit by bit, so it's exciting.
It's funny because so many people years ago would dream of the chance to listen to albums before they came out, and so it's cool to be on that end of things now, producing the podcast. I get this kind of access sometimes. So
it's funny that you mention that, because the algorithm just the other day gave me a Radiohead story about album leaks back in the 90s and early 2000s. Bands and record labels would send records out to reviewers, but didn't want leaks happening, so Radiohead came up with some sort of tape machine that would destroy the tape if you opened it and tried to take the tape out. And
I think that was OK Computer. Yeah, they glued it shut or something.
Yeah. It was OK Computer, and some of them still exist and are being sold online for hundreds and hundreds of dollars. But it's a pretty cool little innovation that they came up with in order to keep that from happening.
Well, it's ironic that they did that length with OK Computer, because then, of course, Kid A was the one that got famous for having leaked on Napster. And actually, that might have been what led it to number one, ironically. But then they had that mini disc leak, too, which was super interesting.
See,
Did you hear about that?
I missed both of those because at the time I was a Mormon missionary. You know those guys that knock on your door on Saturday and bug the hell out of you? I was one of those guys in Oklahoma. And when you're doing that, you're not supposed to be listening to secular music, which was a rule I broke all the time.
And I didn't know that.
And that's when Kid A was coming out. So I missed the whole Napster era, but I was sort of peripherally aware of what my favorite bands were doing. And Radiohead was one of those bands that I would consistently break the rules to listen to keep up to date. Like my friends and I would send... Well, they would send me cassette tapes of like Radiohead's performance from Saturday Night Live, where they played National Anthem or something.
Oh, yeah.
So these are really low quality recordings, and I'm straining to hear what they're doing, in secret, so that I don't get in trouble.
It's really quiet, yeah.
But that and a lot of stuff from Kid A, my friend would send me these tapes, and I was just like, wow, this is new. It was one of those moments where you can tell something is pivoting. Something is shifting a little bit because of what these guys are doing. And eventually I got to actually see that performance taped that somebody had somewhere. But it was all very covert, but I couldn't help myself.
That's almost the perfect Radiohead listening environment, though. Who hasn't had Kid A in one ear, low volume, hiding in their closet with fear of persecution around them? I've been there. So let's talk about your album a little bit. I noticed right off the bat, we're here to talk about Radiohead influence, but when I listened through it, I heard everything from rock, pop, soul, jazz. I swear there was some grunge and stuff in there. But then also I noticed the title right away too, Gloom Division. Is that a play on Joy Division?
Yeah, it is. The last record, 80s influence has always just kind of been somewhere in here, but it's never been like a main go-to for me. Like I was never interested in being like a revivalist or anything. So when I made my last record, and I would see the talk about what I had done, and people kept saying things like 80s and synth pop, and I was like, what? Like, what are you hearing that I'm not hearing? So, so this record, I really wanted to lean more heavily into things that I was into in the late 90s and early 2000s when I was, 19, 20 something. And all that stuff that you mentioned was what I was listening to. Things like Radiohead and Phantom Planet and Ben Folds 5 and Weezer's Pinkerton and stuff like that. Those are all things that influenced this new record, I think. Is that period of my life, sonically at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's so funny you mentioned about things that someone else hears in your music which you didn't necessarily put there, didn't think you did. I have a song I'm working on right now, and my daughter always wants to skip the beginning and go to the rock and roll part. I don't have any rock and roll in there. It's really funny. But I think that, I was listening through it, and I kept trying to label it with a genre. And then I realized that, and I was wondering about your thoughts about this, but I feel like we're entering a post-genre kind of era where artists can sort of explore the sounds they want within a song, within an album. Post Malone really is big on this, I think. And I wanted kind of your thoughts on that, though. Like, do you feel confined to an album anymore? The time you're talking about, if you said you were into alternative rock, I mean, it doesn't matter what band it was, Interpol, Weezer, Radiohead, Sigur Rós, you'd start hearing some whiny guitars and sappy vocals, kind of, and it would fit into a little box. But music isn't like that anymore.
I don't think it should be. I think genre should... I've always been like a song guy. Songs were always more important to me than a genre or anything else. So there are artists who I still admire today, like Beck, who I was really into back in the day. And then his album... he had his big hit with Loser and stuff, but then he came out with things like Odelay and New Pollution and... Midnight Vultures was my favorite record of his, and he would always, make those pivots and those left-hand turns, and genre was less important than the song. I always admired that mentality, being an artist. So that's something that I want to do too. Like I don't ever want to have to do the same thing twice. So if I wanted to make like a Chet Baker sounding jazz song, I would put it on the same record as a country song if I wanted to make one, which I have, but I haven't recorded it yet.
Oh, that's cool.
One day, we'll see.
Wilco ended up doing that. Their last album ended up being a whole kind of country experience in a way.
It's very cool being able to talk. You're saying all of these bands that are like on the list of stuff that I love, which I really appreciate, because in my experience, most people want, when they make comparisons to what you're doing, it's that shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line thing. That's I think that's true with music too. Like, people want to make the shortest and easiest comparison they possibly can. So because I had a job in Panic at the Disco, people always want to draw that comparison and say things like emo and Warped Tour and stuff, things that I never listened to or had any interest in whatsoever. Like,
it's so funny that whole word, that emo word, has always bothered me. Like, what does it even mean, emo?
To me, it means like Hot Topic and the side-swiped hair and the...
I guess.
I don't really know. I just know that it's not something that I ever related to. If that's something you like, more power to you. Please enjoy it. Don't let me ever stop you. It's not me trying to disparage anything. It's just a strange thing that has never been a factor in my life creatively. Like, I had a job in that world for a period of time, so I feel like that's the shortest distance between 2 points. So that connection. So I very rarely hear like these bands that you're talking about. That's the stuff that I grew up with and I listened to and connected with, and the stuff that inspired me.
Well, it sounds like we have very similar music taste. Then I could probably
it sounds like it does.
Keep listening here.
Yeah, you keep saying Yeah, that's another one. I love that.
Maybe Talking Heads too a little bit.
Absolutely,
and,
absolutely.
Yeah. That's awesome. And you're going to be surprised by this, but I was actually pretty excited when I got the email, because not only do I know from your manager, but not only do I know of Tame Impala, of course, your producer worked with them, but also
Dave
Mercury
Fridmann.
Rev.
Yeah.
I spent a whole summer listening to the Deserter songs one time, the instrumental version, and I just love that stuff. It's so, I don't remember the year, maybe 98 or something like that. And it just seemed kind of so ahead of its time and very interesting. And it's interesting to know that he went on to do so much production for so many other bands I love, like Mogwai, and it's just crazy.
Yeah, Flaming Lips. We're talking
Lips.
about Dave Fridmann, who was
Yes,
in
sorry,
Mercury
Dave Fridmann.
Rev. And I've been a fan of his since Weezer's Pinkerton. Like in
Yes,
the 90s,
Weezer as well.
when that record came out, it was like I loved it immediately, and none of my friends did, and I didn't understand that. That was hard for me to comprehend. Like, what? You don't hear the same thing that I'm hearing? Because, like, to me, it was sonically just it was perfect. It sounded the way that my brain felt. You know, the feedback and the fuzziness of it, and the broken sounding drums, like playing. So it was turned up so loud that the microphones are breaking. Sounds like that. Like, I really loved. So that was the first time I remember looking to find out, well, who produced this. And as time went on, anytime I discovered a new favorite record, like Flaming Lips, Soft Bulletin, or something like that, I would keep seeing Dave Fridmann's name. So over time, when I collected, a list of like top 10 favorite records of all time, Dave Fridmann had produced maybe like 4 or 5 of them.
Oh, wow.
So I was always like, man, someday I would really love to work with this guy. And I did. That dream came true. I got to check that off my bucket list, and really fantastic to sort of be in his studio cabin out in Buffalo, New York, in the middle of nowhere, and making a record in the same place and with the same stuff that Flaming Lips made their, well, a lot of records out there. Yoshimi, Battles of Pink Robots, and Phantom Planet, who I mentioned before, made their self-titled there, and that's just one after the other of records that sonically for me are just favorites.
It's interesting because so many musicians, I think, get to the point you're talking about where they start researching the producer and things like that. But I sometimes wonder if Spotify should be able to group, maybe it does, but be able to group like artists and albums like this, because I had the same thing one time with Nigel Godrich, who of course is Radiohead's producer. I started looking into other things he was making, and every time I did, I found a new album that I liked, and I was like, "Wait a minute, am I a Radiohead fan or am I a Nigel Godrich fan?" Because
there comes a point, I think, where music nerds start to discover that commonality between artists that they love, and they sort of realize that the producer is just as much of a building block for this thing that you love as the artist who made it too. So that can be an important factor.
I think that's so kind of hidden from the public, though. And I guess that was my next question is, are you open to talking a bit about kind of your artistic process and how you create songs? Like, do you start with a melody? Do you come up with a riff? Do you go for a walk? Like, what does it look like?
Well, it's never really the same thing twice. I never try to force it, like, because I've had those experiences where you sit down in front of your computer and you're like, all right, I'm going to make a song today, and then just you end up with something that's garbage that you abandon after an hour because you're trying to force it. But inspiration can come at any time. 3 a.m. when you're trying to sleep, you get an idea, so you get up and you put it in your phone or something, or watching a movie, or in the car taking a drive out for a walk. It can happen at any time. So I always try to thank God for having that technology where you can just pop an idea into your phone and save it for later, revisit it and see if, oh yeah, that was worth chasing. Let's see what happens. But even then, like, I can get a day or two's worth of work done on a song and come to this like wall that'll stop me, and I just can't. Whatever things I try to throw at it, I can tell that, like, this isn't it, and so that might sit there unfinished for like 3-4 months, a year, until that next idea for that song comes along. But I always want to make sure that it is organic and never forced. So that process for me sometimes takes longer than I'd like it to. But yeah, I never want to have to like force something into existence.
Do you feel like for some songs that takes longer than others? Like you mentioned, I guess that it does, but like how long would a long time be to spend on a song versus a short time? Like, are there any that you do get done in an hour or an afternoon that just kind of come to you like that?
Yeah, I mean, that definitely happens too. Those are the ones that seem to write themselves, and you know, that's always it's really nice when that happens. But it's a little more rare for me, I think. There's songs that have come about that way, but over the course of like an afternoon. But it's more common for me to have it drawn out and have one after another of those walls. Okay, I've got a verse now, or I've got this little hook, or I've got this chorus. And sometimes those can sit in pieces for months, and sometimes you shift them around and see if they can fit together, and that process takes time. But
I love
that. I don't think there's ever one set real process for me other than wait for lightning to strike, because I think it's that you know, that bit of inspiration that's the key to knowing whether something's worth pursuing or not.
It's almost like trusting your gut. I mean, what if we frame the question a little differently? Because I guess the person who asked this, they actually asked more, you know, I've been a musician for a long time. I can play my guitar, but when I sit down and I want to make songs, like I don't really know what to do. So I mentioned something to them, which actually is interesting because you just mentioned as well. You're talking about a verse and a hook and this and that. I found that once I learned how the different sections of songs worked, then I could make songs, because you can sort of start to play with them and reorder them in this. But if you don't know what the sections do or what they function as or anything about that, you're just kind of left with a mess of through composition every time that can sound sort of jumbled. So like, what would you say to someone who they can play their guitar, they can write words, but they're not sure what's next?
Yeah, I would say that learning the basic blueprint for making a song, like you're talking about, is extremely handy. And maybe get used to that formula of intro, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, whatever song structure it is. Like find a song that you like, and maybe dissect that song structure and try to mimic it with your own ideas. And when you get comfortable with that, throw it away. And, and then don't limit yourself to following that formula, but just be aware of it so that you can create song structures that maybe put their foot outside of the door of those rules every once in a while. But use that as a foundation. But if you have all of those parts and you know what a song is supposed to have, write your song. But if you want to make it interesting, throw some of them out the window or rearrange them. I think that can
cut one in half or extend it.
Yeah.
It's so funny because I actually saw recently too, you mentioned Wilco. He has a book about songwriting, which I really love, called How to Write One Song. And he talks a bit about just like even going over and cutting out clippings from books that you find, or just describe what the sunlight's doing on the carpet to the floor, like just making stuff up and seeing what works, and expect that you're going to throw it out. Don't expect that it's going to be great. Just play, really. It's playing music, right?
Yeah, don't have any expectations when you do it, and do it for yourself. Make something that you like. Make something that you would want to listen to. And chances are, if you execute it well, there might be someone out there who enjoys it too. And that's just that shouldn't be the goal, though. I mean, you should like what you're doing, and if someone else likes it too, that's just a bonus that you get to enjoy after the fact.
That's actually exactly what you just said. Was one of my favorite Elliott Smith quotes in an interview.
Oh, really?
Someone asked him about his song, how he writes his songs. He's just like, I just play what I like, and I assume there'll be others that like it out there. And I was that's so honest.
I forget when exactly it was, but there was a producer that I worked with years and years ago that I had said something along those lines of like, I'm just trying to make the kind of music that I would want to hear. And he told me, oh, don't do that. Don't ever do that. And I was like, what are you talking about? Because your fans, you know, they might not like the same kind of music as you. And I was like, well, they fucking should.
They're my fans. They better like
it. The music that I like is great, and they should like the same things that I like. So I wholeheartedly disagreed with that sentiment.
Well, they want to hear your...
trying to to write the kind of stuff that I would want to listen to if it wasn't me making it. And you know, if the people who are listening to what I'm making aren't familiar with the music that we're talking about, the music that I have always loved, then if nothing else, I hope that the music that I'm making can be a door that gets cracked open that leads them to those things. If the music that I'm making can't be your favorite thing, then let me show you what your new favorite thing could be, like Sparks or like Radiohead or like Talking Heads, like we're talking about, like that sort of stuff.
You mentioned some of the songs feel like they write themselves. Have you ever had a full-on like Robert Smith, The Cure moment where you felt like it wasn't your song and you're like an observer? You know, have you heard that Friday I'm in Love story?
Yeah. I love The Cure so much, and I've had that. I might have to sit down and think about it, but the first one that came to mind was actually a Christmas song that I wrote a few years back called "Oh Noel." Really obscure little song. Not a lot of people know about it, but it exists on Spotify and YouTube, and I think that's about it. And that was one of those moments where not just writing it, but also recording it all seemed to happen super organically, not forced, but really instantaneously too. Like the recording process was a one-take deal for vocal and piano. The piano wasn't tuned, but it didn't matter, you know, and the only thing we ended up doing to it was some like vocal overdub stuff on the bridge. But yeah, that was one of those, and always a real treat when something like that can happen. But it's pretty rare for me.
Pat Pattison, the songwriting instructor, I think he teaches at Berkeley, but he once said something like, "There's no such thing as songwriting, only rewriting."
Yeah,
and
I was talking with my little brother about that the other day. He's I love him, but he's one of my biggest critics, like in the best way possible, because he will not sugarcoat things. I'll send, and that's why, like, I'll oftentimes sort of focus group ideas to him that I'm working on. Like if I'm working on something I really like and I send it to him and he says, well this part sucks and this is stupid. And he doesn't even listen to like the same, like he's sort of like an everyman when it comes to the kind of music that he likes. And so yeah, he's one of the only people I know that doesn't sugarcoat his opinions of what I'm doing. So I'll always send him ideas and he'll go, yeah, keep chasing that, or like, no, you got to diss this one. And so God bless him for that. But yeah, he's handy tool to have as a brother that will be brutally honest with you about what you're doing.
I suppose so, yeah. But how do you know then? So if you've got this whole process, I suppose, and you're working on your music. I mean, Gloom Division, it's a collection now of songs that is, we would say, done. I suppose it's slated for release. How do you know when it's done?
Well, I don't know that a song is ever done, really, because even after it's been recorded and put the stamp on it that it's finished and it's been printed and it's out into the world, like you still end up, or at least I still end up tooling around with these songs as we play them live. And it could be 2 or 3 years later after the song has been released and you have some new idea for this song that's in your set, so you'll make it a little tweak or a little adjustment to it, and you kind of go, oh man, I wish I could have put this back in the recorded version. So when it comes to the recorded aspect of it, knowing when to say when is hard, especially now with the kind of technology that we have to record this stuff. It's so easy to go back and fix something or change something. So that can be the challenge is well, when is this finished? You just sort of have to decide, I guess.
Yeah.
But even after you've decided and you sent that thing off to be printed, like it's never really done. So.
It's funny you mentioned about the live, and I've always wondered that, in fact, because I often prefer live versions of bands' music. I mean, Radiohead, I love what they do with some of their live versions versus the album, and I love the album too. But I often find the live version has a little bit, well, obviously because it's live, but just a little bit more energy, or it just feels exactly the tempo the band wants instead of what maybe they ended up with, or the producer was saying or whatever. So it's interesting to kind of hear that perspective of like, yeah, you'll tweak something because that's how you kind of wanted to do it, but you couldn't do it 5 years ago because you didn't know.
Yeah, sometimes it's technology, or sometimes you get an idea that you really like way after the fact. Some of it's just timing. So
Totally.
Yeah.
So speaking of Radiohead and the influence of Radiohead, I mean, we talked about some other influences on the album, but when you say that they inspire you or influence you, I imagine for a musician of your caliber with what you do in the scene, it's kind of a different level than the average person who's like, oh yeah, I love Radiohead, and then they sip their coffee and go to work on whatever they do, right? So what does it mean for you? Like, is it the lyrics? Is it Tom York's, songwriting style? Is it the experimentation? What is it about the band that really...
It's a combination of all that stuff. I mean, as someone who makes music and wants to pursue that as a career, it's hard to imagine somebody who does that who wouldn't love to have a career like Radiohead has had. They've had their big pop hit, that moment of cultural importance, and they've had a career that's spanned 20 plus years, and they're still relevant, and they get to make whatever they want. There's nobody breathing down their neck saying, we need Creep Part 2. They get to make whatever they want and be as weird and experimental as they want, and people are still there to listen to it. So it's hard to imagine anyone who wants to be a musician looking at Radiohead and going, no, I don't want to be like that at all. Like that. To me, they've sort of encapsulated the ideal of what a career in music can be. A lot of people think that it's like a 24-hour party, or when I was a kid and wanted to be a musician, my parents were scared to death because to them rock and roll was like Motley Crue and Sunset Strip hair metal bullshit. And even when I was 8 years old, like I knew that I didn't like that stuff. But a career in music could be that if that's what you want it to be. I don't think you'll last very long. But a band like Radiohead, who's treated it as a way to express themselves, as a job, and as a way of just making art, like that's what I've always wanted to do. They've been doing it for such a long time, and the way that they go about it is so inspiring. And anyone who pursues music would be lucky to have a career like that, I think.
Absolutely. Is there a song on this upcoming album that was particularly sort of inspired by?
Yeah, there's one in particular called Satanic Panic that has this really quick little break of there's this duo of saxophone players that the algorithm sent me a while back when I was making this record, called Moon Hooch, and they were sort of screwing around on their Instagram page doing this little back and forth sax battle. And it wasn't a song or anything, it was just this little Instagram post, and it had this little moment of horns in it. People were here when the record comes out, but I hit them up and said, hey, can I use this Instagram post as a sample? Yeah, of course. No idea what I was going to do with it, but ended up making this song happen around it. But to me, it was very much inspired by some of the horn features that are on Kid A, in things like National Anthem, and it's particularly the live versions. But the song Satanic Panic has these, it's a big wall of noise that has this like instantaneous break and then just this little horn blast in between another big wall of noise. And for me, that was a very, Radiohead thing that I was trying to chase. Hopefully that's, people will be able to, pick that out. But if they don't, I think it still works.
It's funny you say that because I was thinking that when I listened, actually. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool saxophone stuff. Kind of reminds me of Kid A. And but I didn't know it's the guys from Moon Hooch. I love them. Yeah. I know someone who used to play on Broadway, and he knows them as well. So it's
that's
pretty
a
cool
small
little
world,
group.
Man.
Yeah, they're super cool. But they'll just like end up in some train station and have their crazy saxophone battles. It's check them out on YouTube, people. They're really cool. Really cool. Yeah, that song in particular was really, really neat. My favorite, I have to say, so far anyways, because I'm just getting into your album, but What Love had a real kind of cool bassy feel. And
Thank you.
Actually, I really love when bassists write music, because it for some reason, normally the bass just kind of gets treated as some sort of, functional device.
Afterthought. Yeah, a functional
Yeah.
afterthought. And I think sometimes you can tell when the bass player has written the song.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the times the bass will be picking up the melody as well
Yes.
as holding down the rhythm section.
And I love that when it shifts back and forth, kind of, or adds, like, just after a lyric finishes, a little bit of something.
Yeah, some
you
sort
know?
of flair of... flair
Just
is a
to
good
round
word.
off, before it kind of loops back on a verse or something, it just kind of adds a little bit of touch, and Tame Impala does that a lot, which is really, really cool.
Yeah.
And he's actually said something similar where he just writes the music he wants to hear, and I love that. But
Also, another artist who's worked with Dave Fridmann too, so it's
yes,
small world.
yeah, absolutely. But that one, what was I going to say? Something about the bass. Oh no, it just escaped me. Hopefully it comes back. But yeah, I just love when bass players write, because it's so... Oh, yeah, I know what I was going to say. I remember Interpol. Interpol is one of the only bands, I would say, from that era where I would say that the bassist, to me, was like the lead of the band.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Carlos D was so cool, so hip, but just also all those bass riffs were just amazing, So when he actually left Interpol, I was sort of hoping that he would do something kind of like what you have done. But he ended up going into film composition and a bunch of other things and a little more obscurity. I don't know if he liked the fame of music, but so it's very interesting that you have gone off now and you're still playing the bass and also though of course the singing and everything else that's sort of part of it. So it's a great thing to see, and you're in good company. I mean, who else plays bass in bands like this? Sting, of course.
Well, all of my favorite bassists are excuse me. The reason I got into playing bass, actually, because I started on guitar when I was 15, but there was this PBS show that was on in the 90s on Saturday night called Sessions at West 54th.
Mm-hmm.
And I would tune in every Saturday night late, instead of, going on dates with girls. I would watch this show because that's how... This was pre-internet, so this is how you would see artists that you love and discover new stuff too. So I had tuned in to watch Beck, who was on his I think his Midnight Vultures tour, but the opening act on the show was Ben Folds 5. And I had never heard of them, never seen them, nothing. So this 3-person act, piano, bass, and drums, no guitar in the band, and their bass player Robert Sledge was up there playing like these fuzz bass lines and lead stuff and things that I did not know that you could do on bass guitar. So after seeing that performance, not only did they cement themselves as my new favorite band at the time, but I was like, well, I want to do what that guy is doing. So much so that I went out and I saved up some money and bought the same bass that this guy had, and learned all of his parts and stuff. So paid a little bit closer attention to bass guitar after that, which I already kind of was doing because I was already obsessed with the Beatles at that point, and Paul McCartney and the way that he approaches it too. It was a lot like the way we're talking about, melodically and sometimes the centerpiece of the song. So I've always tried to pay attention from that point and from that perspective since I was about 15, 16, I think.
From that perspective, which Radiohead song is your favorite?
Oh man, that's another one I'd have to probably sit down and think about it. National Anthem. That was the first one that came to mind.
Yeah. That's actually mine too.
Which is interesting because I don't think the bass line changes throughout the whole song.
Not really.
But,
if it does, very subtly.
But it's not every bass line needs to. Sometimes it can be one note and still do what it's supposed to do. It doesn't always have to be, Victor Wooten all over the the Jaco Pastorius and the famous bassist that it doesn't always have to be shredding. But so just whatever is in service of the song is what I think.
I think you're exactly right. And National Anthem specifically, I mean, that song is so wild and all over the place in a way. if they had done a different bass line or changed it up halfway through, it might have been too jarring.
Yeah.
And it might not have let you enjoy what's kind of riding on top of that. I always think of National Anthem as almost like an ocean or something, and that's kind of the water, and it just all sits on top and like battling boats or something.
Yeah,
if that makes any sense.
It's that foundation that the song stands on, I think. So I think it's important for it to do what it does. And
it's really cool.
It's really smart too to be able to have musicians that know when to do that, and when to push the pause button on the look at me stuff.
Yes, I think that's one of the things I admire most about Radiohead. Actually, is they all seem to know when to switch it on and when to kind of switch that off and blend. And I talked to one musician. His name was Stanley Drucker. He recently passed away, unfortunately, but he was the principal clarinetist in the New York Philharmonic for 80 years or something like that. But he said basically that too, is that you need to know when to stand out and when to blend in. And for someone of his caliber who played 10,000 shows with the New York Phil, I was like, man, that means something. I gotta write that down, you know?
Yeah, knowing when not to play can add so much to a song. When you were saying that, the talk show host, something that came to mind. That's a song where drums and other instruments don't come in for, what, a minute and a half, 2 minutes until everything else is brought in. And to have that kind of restraint is another thing that I think a lot of songwriters neglect. But
when not to say something is almost as important as when to.
That way, when you do say the thing or when you bring the thing in, it has way more impact.
Yeah, about the National Anthem, one last thing. I had the chance to interview the guy who played saxophone, actually, with them on tour a bit and in the studio. And I mean, I guess he just said it was like a cacophony. They wanted to just get this almost like car crash sound, you know. But you contrast that with a super simple bass line, and it's just such a jarring kind of experience. Interestingly, though, Tom played the bass on that song on the album. I don't know why that happened. I've always wanted to ask that.
Well, he's been playing a lot of bass for the Smile. The Smile, too, right?
Yeah, which is...
Well, I think it's because you really, when you think about it, you really only need 4 strings, and anything more than that, you're just showing off. So that's my philosophy.
Yeah, right. Well, I want to be respectful of our time. I know that we're kind of... have you got a couple more minutes? Or are
Sure,
we...
yeah.
Okay. So I had a couple listener questions here. I kind of fit some of them in as we went along, but a couple are just kind of random. I'll ask here at the end if that's okay.
Yeah.
And was there anything else you wanted to share kind of about your album, your process, or any questions for me or anything like that before you do that?
I had this strange realization the other day, but it sort of fits with what you're saying about that song, National Anthem, sounding like a car crash. I had this realization that the record that I had made sounds like ADHD. Because over the course of the pandemic, when lockdowns and stuff were happening, I was diagnosed with that. It was a later in life diagnosis for the first time, and the record had already been made at that point, and I took my ADHD medication and experienced what I call quiet brain for the first time, and I had a conversation with my wife. Like, is this what it's like for you? Like all the time, just like quiet up here? It's sort of like turning the static off on a TV for the first time, And I'd listened to my record after that, like while I was on the quiet brain wave, and sort of noticed that this is what my brain sounds like all the time. There's a lot going on, and those walls of noise and picking out what you want to hear is just a matter of deciding. So I'm hoping that it's not like too overwhelming for neurotypical people, but for those of us who do have ADHD, I think they'll be right at home with it.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I sometimes, like, I have a very kind of scattered mind myself, and I've never been diagnosed officially with anything, but like I find if I take something like ashwagandha, I could just really focus on focusing on one thing at a time. Is so strange also for me, but I do like actually what you're talking about the album, because I find it's almost a lost art now to have sort of transitions between, or like little intros to a song that appear. And I can't remember the title right now. Maybe it's the very last track, but there's kind of a little spoken words Maybe it's
Yeah, well, I've always really loved that stuff. You know, making an album as a piece of art that
cohesive.
all sort of cohesive and,
Yeah.
and fits together, because the state of music now is song based. You know, single and a single and a single. The art of album making, I think, is less important today, but it's something that I still really enjoy. So finding those moments to tie songs together, or have transitional bits between songs. I always really liked that when I was experiencing albums as a kid. So I think it's why waste that opportunity to do something if you are making a record?
No, I totally agree, and I think that that's also a lost, just like you said, a lost kind of art. And I think that to me, the whole song-based thing is so difficult because a song isn't enough time to really understand an artist or their work. And the thing I don't like most about like Spotify, let's say, is that I tell it how I want to feel. So I want to go for a run. I want upbeat running music. I put that on. Whereas I remember when I was younger, like you say, experiencing an album, the music told me how to feel, kind of.
Yeah.
And it's a journey. Like Kid A goes from kind of mellow to really sort of frantic and everything in between. You have every emotion in there. It's not like, where's my Radiohead running playlist? I don't want to be stretched that much right now. I'd hate to feel something.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. It's another thing that I've noticed every time I've listened. The first time that I've listened to any new record that ends up becoming like one of my favorite things, the experience is always the same on paper. Like the first time you hear this thing, something like an OK Computer or a Kid A, or for me it was things like This Year's Model, Elvis Costello, or the first time you hear a Talking Heads album, whatever it is, that gut reaction for me has always been, well, what is this? What is this? Is this good? Is this bad? I don't know yet. I don't know what this is. And then the second time you listen to it, you're like, this is weird, but I like this. And then the third time you listen to it, you're like, this is my new favorite thing in the world. And so I wanted to make a record for people that hopefully brings that experience to them. I hope that that's the initial reaction. And I hope that after people have that what is this reaction, they give it another chance and one more chance. And by that third listen, I think that might be enough to grab you.
This is so funny because that's exactly the experience I have with all the music that I end up really liking, whether it's Kid A or whatever. And I have to admit, I did have it a bit with this album. At first, I did feel a bit jarred at times, like, oh, this is interesting. So many things mixed up. But now I'm on my third or fourth pass through it, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I can really hear the layers. I really like the elements that are kind of
that makes me
like
very
an
happy
onion.
to hear, because that was very much by design. Just because I'd had that experience so many times with all of my favorite stuff. It's always the first time, what is this?
Yeah.
And you don't know if you like it or not yet. It's something that you want to revisit and re-examine to see if you like this or not. But by that third listen, like and it's cemented, and you've picked up on the things that the artist was after. Like the first time I listened to This Year's Model, I think I was like 23 or 24, and I went out and bought that album because I was a big fan of Phantom Planet, and I read some interview where they talked about This Year's Model being an influence. So I wanted to know where they were coming from. So I went out and got that record and listened to it, and I was like, what the hell? And it was another one of those things where by the third listen I was like, well, this is my new favorite record.
Yeah, and then be on rotation for a while.
So yeah, it was like that with OK Computer. It was like that with Kid A as well, and it was like that with Hail to the Thief, which I think is probably my favorite Radiohead record. And I know that's probably not the most popular one that is on everyone's list, but I really like that record a lot.
It is really cool. I have another friend who that's his favorite for sure, and I can see why. I really like, for me, the trio of Kid A, Amnesiac, Hail to the Thief, like I could just live with those and be good.
Absolutely.
The fact we have all the other stuff is a treat.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let me fire off these quick listener questions.
Yeah.
first one, I don't know if you want to answer this, but are there any tours planned beyond the current one? I mean, someone asked if you were going to play in Australia, Mexico. I don't know if you can play Upside Down, so I'm not sure about Australia. But
Well, nothing's planned for Australia yet. I haven't been there for many years, but I would love to go back. And as soon as we have an opportunity to do something like that, we are absolutely take it. But unfortunately, it's always a matter of costs versus interest and things like that. So if enough interest is going on down there, and we could afford to get down there without breaking the bank, like we would absolutely make it happen. But there's some Europe stuff in the works and UK. Hopefully in the summertime. So I don't think anything's been, set in stone yet. But I think they're working on it to see if that's something we can do.
nothing for Calgary where I am, but I'm going to try and get out to your Vancouver show, I think.
Oh yeah, well, you're more than welcome.
We'll see.
Yeah,
I'll see if I can make it out there.
we got a ticket with your name on it, so no worries.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, well, it's about a 12-hour drive for me, but my work is technically out there, so I could make a work trip. And that's actually when I met Tom York. He was playing a concert out there.
Oh, that's cool.
And I had a work trip, and I was able to go and somehow meet him afterwards. So it was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Pre-show rituals. I don't know if this is a thing for people.
Yeah.
Do you have any?
I mean, not in a superstitious way, just things that I do to make sure that I don't hurt myself. Like I try to get a good stretch in, and the older I get, the longer that process takes. I don't want to pull a hammy when I'm out there, so I always try to get a stretch in, and vocal warm-ups and all that stuff. That's about it. Nothing really as far as like superstition or anything like that.
It's like you're gonna have a 26-minute nap and eat half a banana. And
well,
yeah.
if I can fit in a nap, I'd love to do that. But when it comes to playing shows, it's more like I just want to get out there and let's go, now.
Fair enough. And this would be a great question to wrap things up on, I think. So this person asks, what are your thoughts on other artists becoming inspired by your music and doing covers and having it as an influence?
It's an honor. It makes me think of the way that I was when I was younger and pursuing music, and the artists that I looked up to and revered and imitated and learned from. And to know that there are people in the world doing that with the stuff that I'm making is an incredible honor that I'm very, very grateful for. And it's very surreal to know that that's a reality, and I think about it from time to time. But I'm incredibly lucky, and couldn't be happier with the way that things have turned out and the way that they're going.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I guess I have one last question, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
What advice would you give for people really like myself? I'm just getting started writing an album. I have a music performance degree in classical, but I for years did nothing like with my own music, and I just started writing. What advice would you give to someone who's starting off with music, but there's a limited budget at first? Like I tried to apply for a grant and this and that, and we're talking thousands of dollars a day to record the way that you're supposed to.
Yeah.
So how can one get started these days and still get out there without that kind of investment, or is it really required?
It's not required, and I think more people should listen to the kinds of artists who aren't concerned with high value production. Bands like Guided by Voices or Daniel Johnston. Listen to those two artists in particular. And, if your songwriting is there, then the quality of the recording is way less important. And it becomes less important. Like Daniel Johnston has written some of the most beautiful songs you will ever listen to. And the quality of their recording is done on like one of these things. Daniel Johnston made his albums on a tape recorder like this and duplicated those tapes and passed them around. But those songs, they'll make you cry. So the production matters way less than you think it does. My advice would be just to get going and work on your songwriting and don't worry so much about the $1,000 microphone and the preamps and things like that.
Totally.
So yeah.
I appreciate that. That's very good advice. Get started.
Yeah, get started and listen to some Daniel Johnson, listen to some Guided by Voices, and then after you do that, you'll be like, oh, I don't need that, that vocal processor and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, and don't forget to listen also to some, I don't know how, but they found me.
No peer pressure, of course.
Yeah, right. The new album, I think, gets out February 23rd. Is that correct?
I'm going to take your word for it. At this point, okay. I've been waiting so long for it. I've put the dates out of my mind, and
it's out someday.
Yeah,
it's out
someday in the future.
When it's out, you should check it out. So yeah, it's been a great experience talking with you today, Dallon.
You too. Thanks for having me.
I will try to come out to your show I think it's in April in Vancouver.
Yeah,
and,
again, no pressure. I know that's a long drive for you, but I do appreciate you having me on here, and I always love having an opportunity to talk about music that I love. So this has been great. Thank you.
OK Podcast is brought to you in part by one of my favorite products ever, Bova two-way humidity control packs. I live in a super dry and cold climate in Canada where taking care of guitars, cannabis products, and cigars can be a real challenge. However, it's effortless with Bova. Every 3 months, I just replace the Bova packs in my guitar case, and I know my axe will be comfy and cozy inside. If you use cannabis or cigar products, there's also mini versions, stash bags, and other accessories designed with freshness and taste in mind. Shop now at bovadainc.com and save 10% on your next purchase with code OKPodcast at checkout.